He barely makes minimum wage. My sister snickered at dinner. Then someone turned on the TV. Isn't that him getting an award from the mayor? I just enjoyed how they suddenly changed their tone and cut them off the next day. I, 32M, never expected to find myself sitting at a family dinner where my own sister would mock the man who had helped raise me. But that's exactly what happened last Tuesday, and what followed was perhaps the most satisfying moment of my entire life. My stepfather came into our lives when I was 8. Mom had been struggling after Dad left, working 2 jobs just to keep us fed. He was a janitor at the local community center, quiet and unassuming, the kind of man who never drew attention to himself. My sister was only 4 then, too young to remember the before times, too young to appreciate what he had done for us. The dinner was supposed to be a celebration. Mom and my stepfather had finally paid off their mortgage after 26 years of scraping by. My sister insisted on hosting at her place, showing off the new house her investment banker husband had bought. I should have known something was off when she kept emphasizing how successful they were, how well they were doing. We sat around her glass dining table, everything pristine and expensive. My stepfather looked uncomfortable in his pressed shirt, the nicest one he owned. Mom kept touching his hand, trying to ease his nerves. My sister's husband poured wine that cost more than my stepfather's weekly grocery budget. The trouble started when my brother-in-law asked what my stepfather did for a living. It was an innocent question, but I saw my sister's eyes light up with something cruel. My stepfather explained he had recently retired from his position as head custodian at the community center after 32 years of service. My sister actually laughed. Not a polite chuckle, but a genuine laugh that made Mom flinch. She turned to her husband and said that my stepfather barely made minimum wage his entire career, that it was amazing they had managed to survive at all. Her tone dripped with condescension, as if poverty was a personal failing rather than a circumstance. I felt my jaw tighten. Mom looked down at her plate. My stepfather just smiled, that sad, patient smile I had seen too many times growing up whenever someone dismissed him. My sister continued, warming to her subject. She talked about how important it was to have ambition, to strive for more, to not settle for mediocrity. Every word was a knife aimed at the man who had packed my lunches every single day for 10 years, who had taught me to ride a bike, who had sat up with me during countless nights when I struggled with homework. Her husband nodded along, adding his own thoughts about the importance of career advancement. They were performing for each other, I realized, feeding off each other's superiority. Mom tried to change the subject, mentioning something about dessert, but my sister waved her off. Then she started talking about money, how they were doing so well, how they had just invested in a second property, how their financial advisor had recommended diversifying their portfolio. She made a point of mentioning that they donated to charity, as if that somehow made up for the cruelty happening at her dinner table. I was about to speak up, about to tell her exactly what I thought of her performance, when her husband reached for the remote. He wanted to catch the evening news before dessert. My sister protested weakly, but he was already turning on the massive television mounted above the fireplace. The news anchor appeared, talking about local interest stories. My sister returned to her monologue about success and achievement, barely paying attention to the screen. Mom had gone completely silent, and I could see tears forming in her eyes. Then the anchor introduced a special segment about community heroes, and everything changed. The screen filled with an image of my stepfather, but not as we saw him now. This was footage from the community center, showing him with dozens of kids. The anchor explained that the mayor was presenting a Lifetime Achievement Award to a man who had transformed countless young lives through an after-school program he had started 28 years ago. My sister's voice died mid-sentence. The camera showed the mayor shaking my stepfather's hand, praising him for his dedication. Then they rolled a montage. Kids who had gone through his program, now adults, speaking directly to the camera. A doctor who said my stepfather had convinced her to stay in school when her home life was falling apart. A teacher who credited him with teaching her that education could change everything. A small business owner who broke down crying as he described how my stepfather had paid for his SAT prep course out of his own pocket. I watched my sister's face go pale. Her husband set down his wine glass, suddenly very interested in the television. The news segment detailed how my stepfather had used a portion of his modest salary for nearly 3 decades to fund an informal tutoring and mentorship program. He had arrived at work 2 hours early and stayed 3 hours late every single day, helping kids with homework, teaching life skills, providing a safe space for those who had nowhere else to go. They showed the converted storage room where he had created a small library using books he bought at garage sales. They interviewed a woman who explained that my stepfather had walked her home every evening for 2 years because her neighborhood wasn't safe. They displayed a wall covered in thank you letters, hundreds of them, from people whose lives he had touched. The anchor mentioned that over 800 individuals had written to the mayor's office, nominating my stepfather for recognition. The mayor himself appeared on screen, calling him one of the most impactful citizens in the city's history. They announced a scholarship fund being created in his name. My sister tried to say something, but no words came out. Her carefully constructed superiority had collapsed in less than 5 minutes. Mom was crying openly now, but these were different tears. Pride and vindication mixed together. My stepfather looked embarrassed, clearly having no idea this was airing tonight. He had mentioned receiving an award but had characterized it as a small thing, nothing worth making a fuss over. The segment continued. They showed footage of the award ceremony from earlier that week. My stepfather had given a brief speech, thanking the community center for giving him the opportunity to serve. He had made jokes about his lack of formal education, about being just a janitor with a mop and a desire to help. The audience had given him a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Then came the part that made my sister literally gasp. The mayor announced that the city council had voted unanimously to rename the community center in my stepfather's honor. They unveiled a plaque with his name, and the crowd erupted in applause. My brother-in-law cleared his throat awkwardly. He suddenly remembered he had an early meeting tomorrow and should probably head to bed soon. My sister nodded frantically, agreeing that yes, it was getting quite late. I just sat there, letting the moment sink in. This man, whom my sister had mocked for barely making minimum wage, had built a legacy that her money could never buy. While she was investing in property, he had invested in people. While she was climbing corporate ladders, he was lifting others up from the bottom. The news anchor concluded by noting that several of the people my stepfather had helped were now successful professionals who had pooled their resources to provide him with a substantial financial gift in gratitude. The amount they mentioned made my sister's eyes widen. It was more than she made in a year. Mom stood up, walked over to my stepfather, and kissed his forehead. She told him she had always known he was special, that she had never cared about money because she had married a man rich in the things that actually mattered. My sister tried to recover. She started talking about how wonderful it was, how proud we should all be, how family was what really counted. Her voice was too bright, too forced. I could see her mentally recalculating, trying to spin this in a way that didn't make her look like the villain of the evening. But I was done with politeness. I was done watching her perform. I stood up and told Mom and my stepfather that we should go. Mom looked uncertain, not wanting to cause a scene, but my stepfather nodded. He had the same expression I remembered from my childhood, when he would quietly remove me from situations where I was being treated poorly. Dignity wrapped in kindness. My sister tried to insist we stay for dessert. She had made something special, she said. Her husband added that they had been looking forward to spending more time together. Their desperation was almost palpable. I helped Mom with her coat and asked my stepfather if he wanted to get ice cream. He smiled, that real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and said he knew just the place. As we walked toward the door, my sister followed us, still talking. She asked when we could all get together again, suggested maybe they could visit Mom and my stepfather's house next time, wondered aloud if they could see the award. I turned to her at the door. I told her very calmly that minimum wage had built more character in our stepfather than her 6-figure salary had built in her, that he had been too busy changing lives to worry about investment portfolios. That true wealth had nothing to do with bank accounts. Her face crumpled. She tried to hug Mom, but Mom stepped back. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it said everything. For years, Mom had made excuses for my sister's behavior, had tried to maintain peace in the family. But watching her husband be publicly humiliated in his moment of triumph had apparently been the final straw. We left. The night air felt cleaner somehow. In the car, my stepfather was quiet. Finally, he asked if I thought he had been too embarrassed by the news segment. He worried that people would think he had done good things just for recognition. I assured him that anyone who knew him understood he had spent 3 decades helping others in complete anonymity. Mom held his hand and reminded him that he had tried to keep the awards ceremony small and private. The mayor's office had been the ones to contact the news, not him. The community had chosen to celebrate him publicly because his impact had been too significant to ignore. We got ice cream from the place my stepfather had taken me as a kid whenever I needed to talk. Same small shop, same owner. The owner recognized him immediately and refused payment, saying she had seen the news and felt honored to serve someone who had done so much for the neighborhood. Over ice cream, my stepfather told stories I had never heard. Kids who had been headed toward gangs but chose college instead. Parents who had worked night shifts and trusted him to look after their children. Teachers who had volunteered their time because they believed in what he was building. He talked about the storage room that became a library, how he had begged the center's director for permission to use the space, how he had spent weekends painting it, making it warm and welcoming, how the first kids had been suspicious, thinking it was some kind of trap, before slowly learning to trust. Mom added details he left out. How he had sometimes skipped lunch to save money for supplies. How he had taken on weekend work to afford better books. How he had never once complained, never suggested that his sacrifices were anything special. I realized that my sister had no idea who this man really was. She had grown up in the stability he provided and mistaken that stability for mediocrity. She had seen his humble lifestyle and assumed humble dreams, never understanding that his dreams had been grand enough to encompass hundreds of other people's futures. The next morning, my sister called. I let it go to voicemail. She called again an hour later. Voicemail. By the afternoon, she had called 6 times and sent a dozen text messages. She wanted to apologize, to explain, to make things right. I blocked her number. Then she tried Mom. Mom answered, listened for a moment, then said something I had never heard her say before. She told my sister that some things couldn't be fixed with apologies, that words spoken in cruelty revealed true character, and that she needed time to decide whether she wanted someone that cruel in her life. My sister showed up at their house the next evening. I was there helping my stepfather fix the porch railing. She brought flowers and tears, a carefully rehearsed speech about stress and misunderstandings. She insisted she had always respected him, that we had misinterpreted her words. My stepfather listened patiently, as he always did. Then he told her something I will never forget. He said that respect wasn't something you claimed in hindsight. It was something you demonstrated in the moment. That he had spent his life teaching kids about integrity, and integrity meant standing by your words, not rewriting them when they became inconvenient. He told her he forgave her, because holding grudges accomplished nothing. But forgiveness didn't mean pretending it hadn't happened. It didn't mean immediate restoration of what had been broken. Trust, he explained, was like his library. Built slowly, book by book, and if torn down, required patient reconstruction. My sister left crying. Her husband had stayed in the car, apparently too ashamed to face us. A week passed. Then 2. My sister sent cards, gifts, long letters. She offered to donate to charities in my stepfather's name. She suggested creating a scholarship herself. She was trying to buy her way back in, using the same currency of success she had once wielded as a weapon. But my stepfather wasn't for sale. He had never been for sale. The community center held a rededication ceremony. Hundreds of people attended. The mayor gave another speech. Former students shared testimonials. Local news covered it extensively. My sister saw the coverage and called Mom again, asking if she and her husband could attend the public reception. Mom said no. It has been 3 months now. My sister has slowly stopped calling. Her letters have become less frequent. I think she is finally understanding that some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt with apologies alone. Mom and my stepfather seem lighter somehow. The mortgage is paid off. The city's gift was substantial enough to ensure comfortable retirement. But more importantly, they are surrounded by genuine love from hundreds of people whose lives were changed by simple acts of consistent kindness. My stepfather still volunteers at the center twice a week. He says old habits die hard, and the kids need him. The director created a special position for him, something about mentorship coordination. He gets to keep doing what he loves without the janitor responsibilities. Last week, I attended the center's annual fundraiser. The scholarship fund named after my stepfather has already helped 12 students afford college. One of them, a young woman who wants to be a social worker, gave a speech about the man who taught her that success wasn't measured in dollars but in the lives you touched. My sister wasn't there. Neither was her husband. I don't know if we will ever reconcile as a family. Part of me hopes she learns something from this, that she examines her values and emerges better. Part of me doesn't care anymore. What I do know is that my stepfather, the man who barely made minimum wage, built something more valuable than any investment portfolio. He built hope. He built futures. He built a legacy that will outlive all of us. And my sister's moment of cruelty inadvertently revealed it to everyone who mattered. Sometimes karma doesn't require elaborate schemes or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes it just requires turning on the television at exactly the right moment and letting truth speak for itself. The look on her face when she realized who that man really was, that will stay with me forever. Not because I enjoyed her embarrassment, though I would be lying if I said there wasn't some satisfaction in it, but because it represented a moment of absolute clarity, when the difference between actual worth and perceived value became undeniable. My stepfather taught me many things growing up: patience, kindness, perseverance. But perhaps his greatest lesson was this: the measure of a person has nothing to do with their paycheck and everything to do with how they treat others when no one is watching, when there is no reward, when doing good is simply the right thing to do. He lived that lesson for 3 decades in quiet anonymity. And in one evening, the world learned what our family should have known all along. He was never just a janitor. He was never barely making minimum wage. He was building something far more valuable than money, one child at a time, one conversation at a time, one life at a time. And no amount of my sister's success will ever come close to matching that.